The ideas expressed in the following presentations are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of ACI or its committees. ACI web sessions are recorded at ACI conventions or other concrete industry events and will be made available for viewing free of charge for 1 week. Thereafter, they will be archived on the ACI website or added to ACI's online CEU program, depending on their content. You can earn continuing education credits through ACI's online CEU program. Visit www.concrete.org to register. ACI conventions provide an opportunity for networking and for keeping up to date with the latest in concrete technology and practices.
Now, the next speaker is Professor García, Professor and Structural Designer Luis García from Bogota, Colombia. And he's going to talk about thrift control as the goal, the case of the Colombian code. Now, he's a partner and I guess the big boss, right? At Proyectos y Diseños, which is a consulting engineering company in Colombia. So, Luis, you have 25 minutes, okay?
Thank you.
if you know what that means.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here honoring Mete and the PCA book. And I think we are celebrating 50 years of the PCA book. This means I have the original printing copy from the original printing. But actually, we are in reality celebrating 50 years of an enlightenment. And I think what Mete just presented gives us a glimpse of the reality, what the things this book brought, or the ideas that came forward from it. I'm going to speak about the Colombian case. We are located where three plates collide, actually four until 1903 when Teddy Roosevelt decided to make Panama a country independent from Colombia. At that time it was 4 plates because Cocos plates goes directly to Panama. And actually they are moving, this is GPS measurements from probably 8 years ago. And the Nazca plate is moving like 7 centimeters behind, underneath the South American plate. The Caribbean plate about a centimeter per year. And that brings us a big seismic activity with the subduction. We should be worried about the large circles, red large circles. And we see that a lot of the activity is on the subduction zone on the left side of the map. But we also get a lot of large magnitude earthquakes in the borderline between the Andes and the eastern plains, which is basically the Orinoco River and the Amazon River basin. The database, we have records, written records. The Spanish were good bureaucrats. They send copies to Spain in 3 different boats of everything that was worth mentioning to the king. And the first record of an earthquake occurring what was known as the Nueva Granada at that time by the Spaniards, it comes from 1541, which gives us very close to the 475 years that has been used for many codes. We are just short some 30-something years from that. This is for the last update of our code, 28,000 records, a lot of them junk, but you see that we get of the order of 130 earthquakes with magnitude larger than 6, which makes it interesting in the amount of data we have. They say that bad news is spread very fast, but good news also. And I was a student of Professor Sarria. He was teaching us the copy of the book, of Newmar's book I PCA book I have was ordered at that time and sent by PCA to Colombia for the group he was teaching this, probably late 1960s. And the situation there was that basically the feeling was that any design was the domain of the designer, and he could choose the code he wanted to use. And there was a big argument for many years about using German standards, as became the rule in Argentina and Chile, and using American standards. And the American part won. We established the Colombian Association for Earthquake Engineering in 1975, and one of the first things we did was to translate the 1974 Blue Book, the CIAOC recommendations. That's the copy we have here. And the emphasis was to make people aware that the forces that you calculated with CIAOC, using the CIAOC Blue Book, were linked to a detailing, something that was not that well known by designers. They were using the forces, but the detailing was something that wasn't that important. Then ATC3 came. I remember probably first class I took at the U of I, and Mete was teaching that class, and he disappeared in the beginning of February of 1971. It was because the San Fernando earthquake occurred, and Moraz took the class for, I guess, 1 or 2 weeks while Mete was in San Fernando. But the outcome of this was probably 7 years afterwards, was the ATC3 project, the forerunner of what we have now as the NERD requirements. And the decision was made in Colombia to translate it into Spanish, and this was published in '79, was widely distributed throughout Latin America. And the important part was that it was considered at that time that it was sort of the model for a seismic code to be used in Colombia, because it addressed all the issues that we were worried that the CIAOC didn't do. The zoning of CIAOC was not translatable or transferable outside of California. What was a Zone 3 in CIAOC related with our activity of our own earthquakes. Then came in 1980 a cooperative effort that was masterminded by Mete. It was between the University of Illinois and the Universidad de Los Andes, where I studied and teach in Bogota, for making an adaptation of ATC3 to the Colombian code, for being used as the Colombian code. We had a group of Mete's students helping us, Barriola from Peru, Cathy French, then known as Cathy Wolfram, before she married Mr. French. Jack Melly was there, and Mike Krieger here. They all helped in being sort of the sparrings in the discussions that we had with Mete on how the issues should be addressed. And draft of the Colombian code was made based on ATC3, and from that came a vision that our greatest problem was drift control. And from that, the code made an issue of going first to check drift on the building before you start doing any other type of design with it. Then in March 1983, a sort of shallow 5.5 magnitude earthquake killed some 200 people and caused a lot of structural damage. As a rule, any earthquake of importance always collapses a building of an engineering school. And the one on your right is the Cauca University School, Engineering School. The building collapses, by the way, where Professor Sarria had studied. And from this came all the legal background to bring the code in 1984, and basically based on what the ATC3 publication, plus the work that was done at the U of I. And that was the code in force for 14 years. In 1997, the Congress came out with a law that defined all the issues related to seismic resistance, and that's we are using. And from that, 2 updates of the code came in 1998 and one recently in 2010. We have 28 years of working on the principles that the Blume code brought. In 1987, an advisory committee for the International Decade on Natural Hazard Reduction considered this project that was undertook by the University of Illinois and Andes as one of the best examples ever of technology transfer, and it gave the reason as the strong contacts between the Colombian and U.S. engineers involved in the ATC effort were strong, and we had a chance to adapt ATC-3 to the Colombian environment with the help of the youth developers. Who were they? Mete, the foremost, the masterminder of that, Chet Cis, who helped us all along the way in the undertaking, and Professor Newmark. I remember asking Mete, why does ATC-3 has a reduction when it computes the P-delta effects, it divides the deflections by C sub D? It doesn't make sense. I mean, these are nonlinear. And so Mete told me, go and ask Professor Newmark. So I went there, and he said, well, that was a political decision. We were writing that part, not paying attention, and so we took that out of the Colombian code. But how did we address the story drift case? These are pictures from 1979, before that was the mover, one of the movers of using the ATC-3. And all these are drift related. And these are, for example, the one on the right is a school where all the windows were broken. We are always lucky the kids were on vacation. Well, so we think one of these days will be due for a surprise. And what was the solution here in your left? You see everything is being held by the electrical outlet. And in the next wall, it didn't have an electrical outlet, and that fell on the car. But the real reason why we were working on very strict drift requirements, the reason was we never changed. The construction industry refused to change on the way we build our non-structural elements. And this is true in a lot of Latin American countries, in other countries around the world, in which they say don't take that into account, change the way you're building them, but trying to change the ways is really difficult. The type of studies we did to convince the concrete industry, well, this is a one of the examples in which we design buildings, the same building with different girder and column dimensions, so that all the designs met the detailing requirements, and just we came with the drift we used the drift that came from using those dimensions. And that's the black lines you see there. And the other lines are related to the cost of the structure. So if you go to the yellow zone, it means that the cost will change of the structure. Within that range, it doesn't vary more than 10%. And you can go to having very low drifts, but then you're talking about an increasing cost of 70 or 80%. These we used to prove the building industry that we could go to sort of tolerable drift limits without really changing the cost equation. And this was accepted by the construction industry, and that allowed us to come with a situation in which now we have in the code a drift limit of 0.5% for masonry structure, 1% for other structures. So that was basically how that's handled. Other thing that we worked with was the fact that we always thought that we needed more toughness for the moderate seismic requirements that what ACI 318 had. And this really comes from the fact that the two largest cities in Colombia, which probably will add up to some 12 to 15 million inhabitants, are very close to what we have as the border between moderate and high seismic rates, or what would be required to change the detailing, and with both the large cities located in the moderate seismic zone. So actually what we did was, among other things, was to try to see how much confinement we were really getting out of the requirements. So what we did was very simple. We just worked around the equations for confinement of columns. So we use alpha for the 0.3 constant in the first equation, and for beta for the 0.09. So from that, we made a database of columns in which what we did was apply the rules to this column. We were changing from 12 to 80 inches in dimension, and then change the for square to rectangular columns, change the concrete strength, and use longitudinal bars from number 5 to number 18. And we had each of these 1,200 columns meet the requirements of 318 for, let's say, what at that time was the high seismic risk requirement, and then meet the moderate. And it was obvious from the beginning that if we look at the moderate results for moderate using 318, you see that we have a lot of cases with very low confinement, almost no confinement at all. The line there is the limit for the equation, 0.3 in 318, and in the other case of the other equation, the same situation. Very little confinement from the moderate. From that came a decision to use 60% of what the confinement required by 318 for high, to use that in moderate. That brought the two constants to 0.2 and 0.06 respectively, and we kept the other rules of 318. When we applied that, you see, well, these are columns that are meeting the limit, and then we get proper confinement for those columns, and we also work on a simplified approximate equation. The only thing was use grade 60 number 3 bars, space them at 4 inches, space them horizontally. Every leg of your stirrup or supplementary tie is don't space it horizontally more than half of the dimension of the column of 8 inches. When you apply the same rules, you see that you get proper confinement, and for the other equation the same. So this had been in the Colombian code since 1984. It has provided toughness to beyond what we feel the 318 did. And this last part is one of the big questions we had when we work on the code, where we had just a very few strong motion instruments, 2 very bad records taken far away from previous earthquakes. And the question had always been, what is the link between what ATC3 has in mind as design ground motion with respect to what we expect in a different environment from California? And fortunately, money was invested on instrumentation. At this point, we have probably 250 strong motion instruments. And we have situations, this is Bogota, in which we have a sensor at 180 meters down on rock and one on surface. The situation is very similar to Mexico City. What you have there is the record from the record on rock, and the other one in surface. And when you look at the amplification, we have 32 times in acceleration at close to periods of the order of 2. I mean, this was not a problem when the city was small, but to give you a glimpse, when I was in grade school, the first geography book I had, Bogota had 600,000 inhabitants. When I finished high school, had 1.5 million. When I finished university, had 3 million. And now has, if they allowed themselves to be counted, probably 7 to 8 million. And the city grew on the plateau in the lake where we had no previous experience of amplification. The other important thing is how does the records we have, recent records, how do they match with what is NSR 10 is the spectra as set in the Colombian code, and you have the Newman Hall, Newman Blume Corning, Newman Blume Kapoor, and the Chivara Sozen, one of the Chivara Sozen spectra. And as you can see, it matches very well with the Newman Hall and with the one that's derived from ATC3. And the same thing could be true here or here. So that closes the gap. Are we talking of totally different earthquakes? And this is well within what Mete mentioned about the brilliance of Professor Newmark on devising things that were simple, probably not as good at explaining them as he mentioned. Not bad. And there's the other byproduct, which is now, it's the IPS1 that was written at the time I was working with Mete at Purdue 10 years ago. And from that, we have a new document, ACI 314.R.18, which is the successor of this. I had to bring this photo. It was taken the night before the Mexico earthquake occurred. And we have there Cesar Hernandez, who was a 318 member for many years, Professor Sarria, then Bob Park, that was there in Bogota with Mete. And the next day, we had somebody coming into the presentation, stopping Mete and saying, well, Mexico had been destroyed by the earthquake. And Mete had to leave for Mexico the next day. He was called several times by the State Department. It got to a point where the audience was asking him, what did the President of the United States tell you? And okay. And I think that we are honoring indirectly the University of Illinois, and we are happy not to have followed Snoopy's advice. And we had great parties, but the starting was great. And I think this is probably the best statue on campus at Champaign, Urbana. That's the front of the world's most ugly building the campus has, which is the mathematics big building. And with that, I think I close. And I will ask Mete to come to the podium, because